The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked pavement as Maya trudged forward, her small bare feet leaving faint, dusty prints behind her. She was 9 years old, but her eyes carried the weariness of someone who had seen too much hardship too soon. In her thin arms, she cradled a wicker basket lined with checkered cloth, inside which sat rows of homemade sweets wrapped in colorful plastic. Each piece represented hours of work, her mother's trembling hands stirring sugar and butter over their tiny gas burner while Maya watched and learned. The neighborhood Maya walked through now was nothing like the one where she lived. Here the streets were wide and clean, lined with tall iron fences and gates that seemed to stretch endlessly upward. Behind them stood houses that looked more like palaces, with manicured gardens and gleaming windows that reflected the sky. Cars parked in these driveways cost more than everything Maya's family had ever owned combined. She had been walking for nearly 3 hours, moving from one wealthy enclave to another, knocking on doors and offering her sweets with a politeness her mother had drilled into her. Most people barely looked at her before closing the door. Some offered a few coins out of pity, their faces twisted in something between sympathy and discomfort. A woman in a silk robe had once handed her money without even asking what she was selling, as if the act of looking at Maya's dirty clothes was too much to bear. Maya always said thank you, even when the door slammed before she could finish the words. Her mother had taught her to be grateful for anything, no matter how small. But today had been particularly difficult. The heat was stronger than usual, and Maya's stomach had been empty since the previous evening. She had given her portion of yesterday's meal to her grandmother, who needed it more. The old woman was in a public hospital bed across town, her body failing in ways the doctors said could be slowed with the right medication. But medicine cost money they did not have. That was why Maya walked these streets day after day, hoping each knock would bring enough to keep her grandmother alive a little longer and to buy the pills her mother needed for her own illness. Rachel, Maya's mother, had been sick for as long as Maya could clearly remember. Some days were better than others, but recently the good days had become rare. Rachel coughed constantly, her face pale and drawn, her hands shaking when she tried to do simple tasks. She could not work anymore. She had tried for years, taking whatever job she could find, cleaning houses or washing laundry by hand, but her body had finally given up. Now it was Maya who carried the weight of their survival on her narrow shoulders. Maya stopped at a corner and wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. Her throat was dry, but she had no water. She looked down the street ahead and saw more gates, more walls, more places where people lived lives she could barely imagine. For a moment she considered turning back. Her feet hurt, and exhaustion pulled at every muscle. But then she thought of her mother, lying on the thin mattress in their one-room shack, struggling to breathe, and she forced herself to keep walking. The next gate she approached was the largest she had ever seen. It was made of ornate black iron with gold accents, and beyond it stretched a driveway lined with trees whose branches formed a canopy of green. At the end of the driveway stood a house that took Maya's breath away. It was not just big, it was enormous, with tall white columns and wide balconies and windows that seemed to go on forever. The gardens surrounding it were perfectly kept, with flowers in colors Maya had only seen in picture books. She stood there for a long moment, staring. Part of her wanted to walk past, convinced that no one in a house like that would ever buy candy from a barefoot girl. But another part of her, the part that remembered her mother's labored breathing and her grandmother's frail hand, pushed her forward. She reached out and pressed the button on the intercom mounted beside the gate. The seconds that followed felt like hours. Maya shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her heart beating faster. She was about to turn and leave when a voice crackled through the speaker, deep and smooth and tinged with curiosity. Yes. Maya leaned closer to the intercom, trying to make her voice sound confident. "Good afternoon, sir. I am selling homemade sweets to help my grandmother. Would you like to buy some?" There was a pause. Then the voice replied, "Wait there." The intercom went silent. Maya stood very still, gripping her basket tightly. She heard footsteps approaching from the other side of the gate, measured and unhurried. The gate began to swing open with a quiet mechanical hum, and Maya found herself looking up at a man who seemed to belong to a different world entirely. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows and dark trousers that looked like they had been tailored precisely to fit. His hair was dark with threads of silver at the temples, neatly combed back. His face was stern, with sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw, but his eyes were not unkind. He looked down at Maya with an expression she could not quite read, something between surprise and concern. "You are very young to be selling sweets alone," he said, his voice carrying a faint note of disapproval. Maya met his gaze without flinching. "I am old enough to help my family, sir." The man's eyebrows lifted slightly, and for a moment he seemed to be studying her, taking in the dirt on her feet, the worn fabric of her dress, the way her hair had been tied back with a frayed ribbon. Then he nodded, a gesture that seemed almost respectful. "Wait here," he repeated. "I will get some money." He turned and walked back toward the house, leaving the gate open. Maya stayed where she was, her eyes following him. The driveway was paved with smooth stones, and the trees on either side swayed gently in the breeze. She could see the house more clearly now, with its tall front door and wide windows framed by shutters. Everything about the place spoke of wealth and stability, things Maya had only ever heard about in stories. Her curiosity got the better of her. She took one small step through the gate, then another. She told herself she just wanted to see a little more, just enough to satisfy the wonder that had been building in her chest. The man had left the front door slightly ajar, and through the gap Maya could see a glimpse of the interior. The walls were painted in soft colors, and there was a chandelier hanging from the ceiling that caught the light and scattered it in tiny rainbows. Maya moved closer, her feet silent on the stone path. She reached the doorway and peered inside, her breath catching. The entrance hall was like something out of a dream, with polished marble floors and tall mirrors in gilded frames. There were paintings on the walls, beautiful and elaborate, and furniture that looked like it had come from a museum. The air smelled faintly of flowers and wood polish, a clean and pleasant scent that was nothing like the damp and mildew of the shack where she lived. She stepped inside, just barely, her eyes wide. She knew she should not be here, knew that she was crossing a line, but she could not help herself. It was as if the house had pulled her in, offering a glimpse of a world she had never touched. She moved slowly down the hallway, her gaze darting from one object to another, trying to take it all in, and then she stopped. On the wall directly in front of her, hanging in a frame of polished gold, was a photograph. It was old, the colors slightly faded, but the image was unmistakable. It showed a young woman with long dark hair and a bright smile, her arm linked with that of the man who had just answered the gate. The woman wore a white dress, simple but elegant, and around her neck hung a pendant shaped like a heart with a small blue stone at its center. Maya felt her pulse quicken. She stepped closer, her eyes locked on the photograph. The woman's face was so familiar it made her chest ache. She had seen that face every day of her life, though now it was older and thinner and marked by illness. But there was no mistaking it. The woman in the photograph was her mother. Maya's hands began to tremble. She stared at the image, trying to make sense of it. Why would her mother's photograph be hanging in a mansion like this? Why was she standing beside this wealthy man, looking so happy and so young? Maya had never seen her mother look like that, so carefree and radiant. The woman she knew was worn down by sickness and poverty, her smile rare and fleeting. She heard footsteps behind her and spun around. The man had returned holding a few bills in his hand. But when he saw where she was standing and what she was looking at, he froze. The color drained from his face, and the hand holding the money dropped to his side. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no sound came out. Maya pointed at the photograph, her voice shaking. "Why is my mother's picture in your house?" The man did not answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the photograph and then on Maya, moving back and forth as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. His expression shifted from shock to something deeper, something that looked like pain. He took a step forward, then stopped, his jaw working as he struggled to find words. "What is your name?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maya," she replied. "Maya Torres." The man's face changed again. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by disbelief. He looked at her more closely now, his gaze moving over her features, as if searching for confirmation of something impossible. "Your mother," he said slowly, his words deliberate. "What is her name?" "Rachel Torres," Maya said. The man took a deep breath, and for a moment it seemed as though he might collapse. He walked over to a nearby chair and sat down heavily, his hands gripping the armrests. He stared at the floor, his chest rising and falling with labored breaths. Maya stayed where she was, her heart pounding, unsure whether to run or stay. Finally the man looked up at her again. His eyes were red, and his voice was thick with emotion. "Rachel," he said quietly. "She was my fiancée. We were going to be married, but she died over 10 years ago." Maya shook her head, confusion and fear washing over her. "No, she's alive. She's my mother." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and undeniable. The man stared at her as though she had just spoken in a language he did not understand. Then, slowly, the implications seemed to settle over him like a heavy weight. He put his hands over his face and sat in silence, his shoulders shaking. Maya did not know what to do. She clutched her basket of sweets tightly, her mind racing. This man had been her mother's fiancé. He thought she was dead. But she was not dead. She was alive, sick and struggling, but alive. And if he had been engaged to her mother, then who was he? What had happened between them? The silence stretched on, thick and uncomfortable. Maya took a small step backward, her instinct telling her to leave. This was too much, too strange, too frightening. She did not understand what was happening, but she knew it was something big, something that had been hidden for a long time. The man must have sensed her movement because he looked up suddenly, his eyes locking on hers. "Wait," he said, his voice urgent. "Please do not go. Tell me more. Where is she? Where is Rachel?" But Maya was already backing toward the door, her fear overriding her curiosity. She did not know this man. She did not know what his connection to her mother meant. All she knew was that something was very wrong, and she needed to get away. "I have to go," she said quickly, her voice high and tight. "Please," the man said again, rising from his chair. "I need to know. I need to understand." But Maya did not wait for him to finish. She turned and ran, her bare feet slapping against the marble floor as she raced back through the hallway and out the front door. The basket of sweets bounced against her side, but she did not slow down. She ran down the driveway, through the open gate, and onto the street, her breath coming in short gasps. Behind her she heard the man call out, but his voice grew fainter as she put distance between them. She did not look back. She just kept running, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. She ran until her legs burned and her lungs ached, until the mansion was far behind her, and the streets began to look familiar again. When she finally stopped, she was in a part of the city she recognized, a place where the buildings were old and crumbling, and the people knew what it meant to struggle. She leaned against a wall, her chest heaving, and tried to catch her breath. Her hands were still shaking, and her thoughts were a tangled mess. She thought about the photograph, about her mother's face so young and happy. She thought about the man's reaction, the shock and the pain in his eyes. He had said Rachel was his fiancée. He had said she was dead. But Rachel was not dead. She was at home right now, probably lying on the mattress, coughing and weak. Maya did not understand how any of this could be true. Her mother had always told her that her father died before she was born. She had never mentioned being engaged, never mentioned living in a mansion, or knowing anyone wealthy. Rachel's past was a closed door, one that she never allowed Maya to open. But now that door had cracked, and Maya did not know what to do with what she had seen. She pushed herself away from the wall and started walking again, this time more slowly. Her feet hurt, and exhaustion was settling into her bones. She still had a few sweets left in her basket, but she did not feel like trying to sell them anymore. All she wanted was to go home, to see her mother, to try to make sense of what had just happened. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky by the time Maya reached the neighborhood where she lived. It was a place of narrow dirt roads and makeshift houses, where children played in the dust and adults sat on stoops, talking in low voices. Everyone here knew hardship. Everyone here understood what it meant to go without. Maya's home was at the end of a row of small shacks, each one leaning slightly, as if it might collapse at any moment. The walls were made of scrap wood and corrugated metal, and the roof was patched with tarps and plastic sheets. Inside, there was one room with a dirt floor and a few pieces of broken furniture. It was not much, but it was all they had. Maya pushed open the door and stepped inside. The air was stuffy and warm, and the smell of dampness filled her nose. Rachel was lying on the mattress in the corner, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. She looked even paler than she had that morning, and Maya felt a pang of guilt for being gone so long. She set her basket down quietly and knelt beside her mother. "Mama," she whispered. Rachel's eyes fluttered open. She smiled weakly, reaching out to touch Maya's hand. "You are back," she said, her voice barely audible. "Did you sell anything?" Maya nodded, though she had not sold much. She handed her mother a few coins, the total earnings from the day. Rachel took them and tucked them under the edge of the mattress, where they kept their small savings. "Good girl," Rachel murmured. "You work so hard." Maya wanted to tell her mother what had happened, wanted to ask about the photograph and the man at the mansion, but when she looked at Rachel's tired face, she could not bring herself to do it. Her mother was already carrying so much pain. Adding more seemed cruel, so instead, Maya just sat beside her, holding her hand, and said nothing at all. Alexander Bennett stood in the middle of his grand entrance hall, staring at the photograph on the wall. His hands hung limply at his sides, and his mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts. The girl, Maya, had run away before he could get any real answers. But she had left behind something more powerful than words. She had left behind a truth that Alexander could not ignore. Rachel was alive. The woman he had mourned for over a decade, the woman whose death had torn a hole in his life that never healed, was alive. And she had a daughter who looked to be about 9 years old, which meant she would have been born not long after Rachel disappeared. Alexander's chest tightened as the implications sank in. If Rachel had been pregnant when she left, then Maya was his child, his daughter. The realization made his knees weak, and he sank back into the chair where he had been sitting moments before. He pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to steady himself. For years, he had believed Rachel was dead. His mother had told him about the car accident, had shown him the obituary, had arranged the funeral. It had been a closed casket, which at the time had seemed reasonable given the supposed severity of the crash. Alexander had been too devastated to question any of it. He had trusted his mother completely, had allowed her to handle all the details while he drowned in grief. But now, looking back with the clarity that only hindsight could provide, he saw the gaps. He had never seen a police report. He had never spoken to any witnesses. He had never even asked which hospital had received Rachel's body. His mother had told him it was too painful, that he should focus on healing rather than dwelling on the details. And he had listened, because he had not known what else to do. Alexander stood up and walked back to the photograph. He reached out and touched the glass lightly, his fingers tracing the outline of Rachel's face. She looked so happy in this picture, so full of life. He remembered the day it was taken. They had been at a garden party, celebrating their engagement. Rachel had worn a white sundress, and he had given her the necklace she was wearing in the photo, a heart-shaped pendant with a small sapphire set in the center. She had cried when he put it around her neck, and he had kissed her tears away. That had been one of the happiest days of his life. And then, only a few weeks later, she was gone, or so he had been told. Alexander's hands clenched into fists. If Rachel had not died, if she had run away instead, then why? What could have happened to make her leave without a word? And why had his mother lied to him? He thought about Maya's face, the way her eyes had widened when she saw the photograph. She had recognized her mother immediately, without hesitation. There was no doubt in her voice when she said, "That is my mother." And the way she had looked at him, confused and frightened, told Alexander that she had no idea who he was or what his connection to Rachel had been. He needed to find them. He needed to see Rachel, to hear the truth from her own lips. But Maya had run before he could ask where they lived, and he had no idea where to begin looking. The city was vast, and the poor neighborhoods where she likely came from were sprawling and difficult to navigate for someone who did not know them. Alexander walked to his study, a large room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a heavy oak desk. He picked up his phone and called his head of security, a man named Marcus, who had worked for him for years. "Marcus," Alexander said when the call connected, "I need your help with something urgent." "Of course, sir," Marcus replied, his tone professional. "What do you need?" Alexander hesitated, unsure how to explain without sounding insane. Finally, he said, "I need you to find a girl. Her name is Maya Torres. She is about 9 years old with dark hair, and she was selling sweets on the street today. She came to my gate earlier. There was a pause on the other end of the line." "Is there a problem, sir?" "No," Alexander said quickly. "Not a problem, but I need to find her. It is important, very important." "Understood," Marcus said. "Do you have any other information? An address, perhaps, or a description of where she might live?" "She mentioned she lives in a poor neighborhood," Alexander said. "That is all I know. But she said she was selling sweets to help her grandmother, who is in the hospital, and her mother, who is sick." "I will start looking immediately," Marcus said. "It may take some time, but we will find her." "Thank you," Alexander said, and ended the call. He set the phone down and leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. His mind was racing, too fast to catch any single thought. He tried to focus, to think logically, but all he could see was Rachel's face, young and smiling, and Maya's face, frightened and confused. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Alexander could not eat, could not focus on work, could not do anything except pace and think. His staff noticed his distraction, but they knew better than to ask questions. Alexander had always been a private man, and they respected his need for solitude. As night fell, Alexander returned to the entrance hall and stood once more in front of the photograph. He studied every detail, from the way Rachel's hair fell over her shoulders to the delicate chain of the necklace. He had given her that necklace as a symbol of his love, as a promise that he would always be there for her. And then she had vanished, and he had spent years believing she was dead. But if she was alive, then where had she been all this time? Why had she not reached out to him? Did she think he had abandoned her, or had something or someone forced her to stay away? Alexander's thoughts turned to his mother, Victoria Bennett, a woman who had been both his greatest support and his greatest source of control. She had been a formidable presence in his life, always pushing him toward success, always managing the details he found too tedious to handle. When Rachel disappeared, Victoria had taken charge, arranging everything, making all the decisions. At the time, Alexander had been grateful. Now, he was beginning to wonder if he should have been suspicious instead. Victoria had never approved of Rachel. She had made that clear from the start, though she had been careful to frame her objections in terms of concern rather than outright disapproval. "She comes from a different background," Victoria had said. "Are you sure she is the right fit for this family?" Alexander had ignored her warnings, convinced that love was enough to bridge any gap. But what if Victoria had decided to take matters into her own hands? What if she had done something to drive Rachel away? The thought made Alexander's blood run cold. He did not want to believe it, but he could not dismiss the possibility. Victoria had been capable of many things, and she had always believed she knew what was best for him. He needed answers, but Victoria had died 3 years ago, taking whatever secrets she had with her to the grave. Or so Alexander had thought. Now he wondered if there might be something left behind, some clue that could help him understand what had really happened. The next morning, Alexander cancelled all his meetings and drove to his mother's old estate, a sprawling property on the outskirts of the city. The house had been locked up since her death, and Alexander had not been back since the funeral. It had felt too painful, too filled with memories he was not ready to face, but now he had no choice. He unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air was stale, and dust covered every surface. The furniture was draped in white sheets, and the curtains were drawn, casting the rooms in a dim, ghostly light. Alexander moved through the house slowly, his footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. He went straight to Victoria's study, a room she had kept meticulously organized. Her desk was still neat, with papers stacked in precise piles and pens lined up in a row. Alexander began searching through the drawers, looking for anything that might give him answers. It took hours. He went through files and folders, sorting through business documents and personal correspondence. Most of it was mundane, the kind of paperwork that accumulates over a lifetime. But then, in the bottom drawer of a filing cabinet, he found a locked box. Alexander stared at it for a moment, his heart beating faster. He did not have the key, but he was determined to open it. He found a letter opener on the desk and used it to pry the lock. It took several tries, but eventually the box clicked open. Inside were more papers, these ones older and more worn. Alexander pulled them out carefully and began to read. There were letters, some addressed to Victoria, and some written by her. As he read, a picture began to form, one that made his stomach turn. The letters detailed conversations Victoria had had with a private investigator, someone she had hired to look into Rachel's background. The investigator's reports were brutal, painting Rachel as someone unsuitable for the Bennett family, someone who came from poverty and had no prospects. Victoria had written responses, instructing the investigator to find more, to dig deeper, to find something that would convince Alexander to end the engagement. But there was more. At the bottom of the stack was a letter written in Victoria's own hand, dated just days before Rachel disappeared. In it, Victoria described a meeting she had arranged with Rachel, a meeting where she had made it clear that Rachel was not welcome in the family. The letter was cold and clinical, detailing the threats Victoria had made and the ultimatum she had delivered. Alexander's hands shook as he read. His mother had threatened Rachel. She had told her to leave, to disappear, or face consequences. The letter did not specify what those consequences were, but the tone was clear. Victoria had been prepared to do whatever it took to remove Rachel from Alexander's life. And then, in the final paragraph, Victoria wrote something that made Alexander's breath catch. If she refuses to leave, I will ensure she regrets it. I will not allow my son to throw his life away on someone so beneath him. If necessary, I will make certain she is removed permanently." Alexander dropped the letter, his vision blurring. His mother had done this. She had driven Rachel away, had threatened her, had forced her to run. And then she had lied to him, had told him Rachel was dead, had even staged a funeral to make the lie convincing. He felt sick. His entire life had been built on a foundation of lies, and the person responsible was the one he had trusted most. He gathered the letters and put them back in the box, his movements mechanical. He needed to find Rachel. He needed to tell her that he had not abandoned her, that he had not known what his mother had done. He needed to make things right, if that was even possible. But first, he had to find Maya. She was the key to everything, the link between the past and the present. And if she really was his daughter, then he had a responsibility to her, one he had been denied for far too long. Alexander left the estate and drove back to the city, the box of letters sitting on the passenger seat beside him. He called Marcus again and asked for an update. "We have been asking around, sir," Marcus said. "It is difficult. There are many neighborhoods, and people are not always willing to talk to strangers, but we are making progress. I believe we will have a location soon." "Keep looking," Alexander said. "I need to find her." "Understood, sir." Alexander ended the call and continued driving, his mind still reeling. He thought about Maya, about the way she had looked at him with those wide, frightened eyes. She had no idea who he was, no idea that he was her father. She only knew that her mother's photograph was hanging in a stranger's house, and that the stranger seemed to be falling apart at the sight of her. He thought about Rachel, about the life she must have lived for the past 10 years. She had been pregnant and alone, driven away by threats and fear. She had raised their daughter in poverty, struggling to survive while he lived in comfort, never knowing the truth. The guilt was overwhelming. Even though he had not known, even though he had been lied to just as much as Rachel had, he could not shake the feeling that he should have done more. He should have questioned his mother, should have demanded to see proof, should have done something other than simply accept what he was told. But he had been too broken by grief to think clearly, and Victoria had taken full advantage of that. Alexander spent the next several days in a state of restless anxiety. He could not focus on work, could not sleep, could not do anything except wait for Marcus to call with news. He kept the box of letters in his study, reading them over and over, trying to understand how his mother could have been so cruel. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Marcus called. "We found her, sir," he said. "Maya Torres. She lives in the San Isidro district in one of the informal settlements. I have the address." Alexander's heart leaped. "Send it to me." "I am going there now." "Sir, I should warn you," Marcus said. "It is not a safe area. I recommend you let me accompany you, or at least wait until I can arrange proper security." "No," Alexander said firmly. "I am going now. Send me the address." Marcus hesitated, then sighed. "As you wish, sir. I am sending it now." Alexander's phone buzzed with a message containing the address. He grabbed his keys and left the house immediately, driving toward the San Isidro district with a sense of urgency he had not felt in years. The neighborhood was everything Marcus had implied, and more. The streets were narrow and unpaved, lined with makeshift houses that looked like they could collapse at any moment. Trash piled up in corners, and the smell of sewage hung in the air. People watched him as he drove past, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. His car, a sleek black sedan, stood out painfully against the backdrop of poverty. Alexander parked at the edge of the settlement and got out, locking the doors behind him. He walked slowly, following the directions on his phone, acutely aware of the stares he was attracting. He kept his head down and tried to look as non-threatening as possible, though he knew his clothes alone marked him as an outsider. As he turned a corner, a group of men stepped into his path. They were young, with hard eyes and crossed arms. One of them, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, spoke first. "You lost?" Alexander stopped, keeping his hands visible and his posture non-confrontational. "I am looking for someone. A girl named Maya Torres." The men exchanged glances. The one with the scar stepped closer. "Why?" "It is a personal matter," Alexander said carefully. "I mean no harm. I just need to speak with her. People like you do not come here unless they want something," another man said, his voice laced with suspicion. "What do you really want?" Alexander hesitated. He could not explain the whole story, not to strangers on the street, but he needed to get past them. "Please," he said, "I just need to find her. It is important." The men did not move. The tension was thick, and Alexander began to worry that this had been a mistake. But then, from somewhere behind the group, he heard a familiar voice. "Senor?" He looked up and saw Maya standing at the end of the alley, holding a plastic bag filled with bread. She stared at him, her eyes wide with surprise and confusion. The men turned to look at her, and the one with the scar frowned. "You know this guy?" Maya nodded slowly. "Yes, he is. He is okay." The men seemed uncertain, but they stepped aside, letting Alexander pass. He walked toward Maya, his heart pounding. She watched him approach, her expression guarded. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I came to see you," Alexander said, "and to talk to your mother." Maya's face went pale. She looked around as if checking to see who might be listening, then motioned for him to follow her. "Come, but be quiet." She led him through a maze of narrow pathways, past houses that seemed to lean against each other for support. Children played in the dirt, and women hung laundry on lines strung between buildings. Everyone they passed stared at Alexander, and he could feel the weight of their scrutiny. Finally, Maya stopped in front of a small shack made of corrugated metal and scrap wood. The door was little more than a piece of plywood on hinges, and the roof was covered with plastic tarps held down by stones. "This is where we live," Maya said quietly, and there was something in her tone that might have been shame or defiance. Alexander could not tell which. "Thank you for bringing me here," Alexander said. Maya nodded and pushed open the door. "Mama is inside. She is sick, so please be gentle." Alexander followed her inside, ducking his head to fit through the low doorway. The interior was dim and cramped, with barely enough room to stand. There was a mattress on the floor, covered with a thin blanket, and a few pieces of furniture that looked like they had been salvaged from trash heaps. The air was stuffy and smelled of illness and poverty. On the mattress lay a woman who Alexander almost did not recognize. She was painfully thin, her skin pale and her eyes sunken. Her hair, once long and dark and lustrous, was now limp and tangled. But when she looked up and saw him standing in the doorway, her expression changed. Shock, fear, and something else, something that might have been longing, all flashed across her face in rapid succession. "Alexander," she whispered, her voice hoarse. He took a step forward, his throat tightening. "Rachel." They stared at each other across the tiny room, and for a moment the years seemed to collapse. Alexander saw the woman he had loved, the woman he had mourned, and Rachel saw the man she had left behind, the man she had never stopped thinking about. Maya stood between them, looking from one to the other, her confusion evident. "You know each other," she said, though it was not really a question. Rachel nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving Alexander's face. "Yes. We knew each other a long time ago." Alexander felt his legs go weak, and he knelt down beside the mattress, bringing himself to eye level with Rachel. Up close, he could see the toll that years of hardship had taken on her. She looked exhausted, as though the effort of simply staying alive was almost too much to bear. "I thought you were dead," he said, his voice breaking. My mother told me you died in an accident. She showed me the obituary, arranged the funeral. I mourned you for 10 years. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I never wanted you to think that. But I had no choice. Why? Alexander asked, the word coming out more forcefully than he intended. Why did you leave? Why did you not tell me? Rachel looked at Maya, then back at Alexander. Your mother, she said quietly. She came to me before I could tell you I was pregnant. She told me to leave, to disappear, or she would make sure I regretted it. She said she would destroy me, and if I ever told you about the baby, she would come after us both. I was terrified. I did not know what to do, so I ran. Alexander closed his eyes, the confirmation of what he had read in the letters hitting him like a physical blow. She lied to me, he said. She told me you were dead. She faked everything. I know, Rachel said. I found out later through a friend. But by then, it was too late. I was already gone, already trying to survive on my own. I thought about coming back, about telling you the truth, but I was afraid. What if she made good on her threats? What if she hurt Maya? I could not take that risk. Alexander opened his eyes and looked at Maya, who was standing very still, her face pale. Is she mine? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Rachel nodded. Yes, she is your daughter. The words hung in the air, and Alexander felt something break open inside him. All the grief, all the anger, all the years of loneliness, they all came rushing out at once. He reached out and took Rachel's hand, holding it gently. I am so sorry, he said. I am sorry I did not protect you. I am sorry I did not know. I am sorry for everything. Rachel squeezed his hand, her tears falling freely now. It was not your fault. You did not know. Your mother made sure of that. Maya stepped forward, her voice small. So you are my father. Alexander looked up at her, and for the first time he saw her clearly, not as a stranger who had knocked on his gate, but as his daughter, the child he had never known he had. He saw Rachel's eyes in her face, and his own strong jawline. He saw the resilience and strength that had kept her going through a childhood of hardship. Yes, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I am your father. Maya stared at him for a long moment, processing the information. Then, slowly, she nodded. Okay, she said, and there was a note of acceptance in her voice, though Alexander could see the confusion and uncertainty still swirling behind her eyes. They sat together in that tiny, cramped shack, the three of them connected by blood and circumstance, and a past that had been stolen from them. Outside, the sounds of the neighborhood continued, the shouts of children and the hum of daily life. But inside, there was a fragile, tentative quiet, the beginning of something that might, with time and care, grow into a family. Alexander stayed for hours, asking questions and listening to Rachel's story. She told him about the years she had spent running, moving from place to place, always afraid that Victoria would find them. She told him about giving birth alone in a public hospital, with no one to hold her hand or help her through the pain. She told him about the jobs she had worked, cleaning and washing and doing whatever she could to keep Maya fed and clothed. She told him about her illness, how it had started as a cough and gradually worsened until she could barely breathe, and how they had no money for the medication she needed. Alexander listened to every word, his heart breaking with each new detail. He thought about the life he had been living during those same years, the comfort and security and luxury, while Rachel and Maya struggled just to survive. The injustice of it was almost unbearable. When Rachel finally finished speaking, her voice hoarse from the effort, Alexander made a promise. I will take care of you, he said. Both of you. You will never have to worry about money or medicine or anything again. I will make sure you are safe. Rachel looked at him with exhausted eyes. Why would you do that? After everything that happened? Because I love you, Alexander said simply. I never stopped. And because Maya is my daughter, and I have already missed 10 years of her life. I will not miss any more. Rachel closed her eyes, fresh tears slipping down her cheeks. I do not know what to say. You do not have to say anything, Alexander replied. Just let me help. Maya, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. Does this mean we can leave here? Alexander looked at her and nodded. Yes, if you want to. Maya glanced at her mother, then back at Alexander. I want to, she said firmly. I want Mama to get better. I want her to have medicine and good food. I want us to be safe. Then that is what will happen, Alexander said. He spent the rest of the day making arrangements. He called a doctor he trusted and asked him to come to the shack to examine Rachel. The doctor arrived within the hour, a kind older man who did not bat an eye at the surroundings. He checked Rachel's vitals, listened to her breathing, and wrote out a list of medications she needed immediately. She needs rest, proper nutrition, and these medications, the doctor said to Alexander. With the right care, she should improve. But she cannot stay here. This environment is making her sicker. She will not be staying here much longer, Alexander assured him. The doctor nodded and left, promising to have the medications delivered by the end of the day. True to his word, a package arrived that evening, and Alexander helped Rachel take her first dose. She was too weak to resist, too tired to question, and she accepted the help with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. As night fell, Alexander prepared to leave, but not before making sure Maya and Rachel had everything they needed. He left money for food, more than they would typically see in a month, and promised to return the next day. We will figure this out together, he said, looking at both of them. I promise. Maya walked him to the door, and as he stepped outside, she looked up at him. Thank you, she said quietly. Alexander knelt down so he was at her level. You do not need to thank me, he said. You are my daughter. Taking care of you is not a favor. It is my responsibility and my privilege. Maya nodded, and for the first time since he had met her, she smiled. It was a small smile, tentative and uncertain, but it was real. Alexander stood and walked back through the narrow pathways, his heart lighter than it had been in days. He knew there was still so much to figure out, so many conversations to have and decisions to make. But for the first time in 10 years, he felt like he had a purpose, something worth fighting for. When he reached his car, he sat in the driver's seat for a moment, staring out at the settlement. This was where his daughter had grown up, in poverty and hardship, while he had lived in ignorance and comfort. The thought still made him sick, but now he had a chance to change things. He had a chance to make up for the years that had been stolen from them. He started the engine and drove home, already planning what he would do next. He would bring Rachel and Maya to his house, give them the care and comfort they deserved. He would rebuild the relationship that had been torn apart by lies and threats, and he would make sure that they never had to suffer again. The following morning, Alexander returned to the settlement with a plan. He had arranged for a private ambulance to transport Rachel to a clinic where she could receive proper treatment, and he had hired movers to pack up what few belongings they had. When he arrived, Maya was already awake, sitting outside the shack with her basket of sweets, as if she were preparing to go out and sell them. You do not have to do that anymore, Alexander said gently. Maya looked up at him, her expression uncertain. What else will I do? You will go to school, Alexander said. You will be a child, the way you should have been all along. Maya looked down at her basket, then back at him. What about Mama? Your mother is coming with us, Alexander said. I have arranged for her to see doctors who can help her. She will get better, Maya. I promise. Maya nodded slowly, and Alexander could see the hope beginning to light up her face. She set the basket aside and stood, ready to follow him. Inside the shack, Rachel was awake but still weak. The medications had helped a little, easing her breathing, but she was far from recovered. Alexander knelt beside her and explained the plan. At first, Rachel resisted, her pride making it difficult for her to accept so much help. But when she looked at Maya, saw the hope in her daughter's eyes, she relented. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." The movers arrived and carefully packed the few items Rachel and Maya owned. It did not take long. Everything they had fit into 2 small boxes. Alexander watched, struck by how little they had accumulated over the years, how they had lived with almost nothing. The ambulance arrived next, and Rachel was gently lifted onto a stretcher and carried out. Maya held her mother's hand the entire time, refusing to let go. Alexander walked beside them, his presence a steady reassurance. They drove through the city, leaving the cramped settlement behind and heading toward the clinic. Maya watched out the window, her eyes wide as the scenery changed from crumbling shacks to clean streets and tall buildings. She had rarely left her neighborhood, and the sight of the wealthier parts of the city was almost overwhelming. At the clinic, Rachel was admitted immediately and taken to a private room. The doctors ran a series of tests, and Alexander stayed with Maya in the waiting area, answering her questions as best he could. "Will Mama be okay?" Maya asked, her voice small. "Yes," Alexander said with conviction. "She will be okay. The doctors here are very good, and they will take care of her." Maya nodded, though Alexander could see the worry still etched on her face. He put an arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him, accepting the comfort. Hours passed. Finally, a doctor emerged and gave them an update. Rachel was stable, and with the right treatment, she would recover. It would take time, but the prognosis was good. Alexander felt a wave of relief wash over him, and Maya's face lit up with a smile. "Can we see her?" Maya asked. "Of course," the doctor said. They were led to Rachel's room, where she lay in a clean bed with white sheets, an IV drip attached to her arm. She looked better already, the color beginning to return to her cheeks. When she saw Maya, she smiled and reached out her hand. Maya ran to her and hugged her gently, careful not to disturb the IV. "Mama, you are going to get better." "I know, sweetheart," Rachel said, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "Thanks to your father." Alexander stood at the foot of the bed, watching them. Seeing them together, safe and cared for, filled him with a sense of peace he had not felt in years. Over the next few days, Rachel's condition improved steadily, the medications worked, and the rest and proper nutrition made a visible difference. She still had a long road ahead, but the worst was over. During that time, Alexander made arrangements for them to move into his home. He had a room prepared for Maya, bright and spacious, with a large window that let in plenty of sunlight. He had another room prepared for Rachel, close to Maya's, so they could be near each other. When Rachel was finally discharged from the clinic, Alexander drove them to the mansion. Maya sat in the back seat, her eyes wide as they passed through the gates and up the long driveway. She remembered this place from her first visit, but now it felt different. Now it felt like she was coming home. They stepped inside, and Rachel looked around, her expression unreadable. The last time she had been in a place like this, she had been young and engaged to Alexander, full of hope for the future. Now she was a different person, shaped by years of hardship and struggle. But as she looked at the familiar elegance, at the paintings and the polished floors, she felt a strange sense of coming full circle. "This is your home now," Alexander said, addressing both of them. "For as long as you want it to be." Maya explored eagerly, running from room to room, her laughter echoing through the halls. Rachel watched her, a soft smile on her face. "Thank you," she said to Alexander, "for everything." "You do not need to thank me," he replied. "This is where you belong, where you have always belonged." In the days that followed, they began to settle into a new routine. Maya enrolled in a nearby school, her first time ever receiving formal education. She threw herself into learning with enthusiasm, eager to catch up on everything she had missed. Rachel continued to recover, growing stronger with each passing day. She spent her time resting, reading, and slowly beginning to feel like herself again. Alexander watched over them both, making sure they had everything they needed. He took Maya to school in the mornings and picked her up in the afternoons. He sat with Rachel in the evenings, and they talked about the past, about what had happened and what might have been. It was not always easy. There were difficult conversations, moments of pain and regret. Rachel struggled with feelings of guilt, believing she should have fought harder, should have told Alexander the truth despite the threats. Alexander struggled with his own guilt, haunted by the fact that he had believed his mother's lies so easily. But through it all, they were together, and slowly the wounds began to heal. One evening, as they sat in the garden where the photograph had been taken so many years ago, Rachel looked at Alexander and said, "I still love you. I never stopped." Alexander reached for her hand. "I never stopped loving you either." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the years pressing down on them, but also the hope of what lay ahead. They had been given a second chance, and they were determined not to waste it. Maya came running out of the house, her school uniform rumpled from a day of play. She climbed onto the bench between them and looked up at the sky, which was turning pink and orange with the setting sun. "This is nice," she said simply. Alexander and Rachel exchanged a glance, and they both smiled. "Yes," Alexander agreed, "it is." As the weeks turned into months, the Bennett household transformed. What had once been a quiet, lonely place, filled with memories, became a home full of life and laughter. Maya's drawings covered the walls, her toys scattered across the floors. The staff, initially uncertain about the sudden changes, quickly grew fond of the lively child who brought such energy into their routines. Rachel's health continued to improve. The medications, combined with rest and proper nutrition, worked wonders. Her cough faded, her strength returned, and the color came back to her face. She began to help around the house, not because she had to, but because she wanted to feel useful. She spent time in the garden, planting flowers and vegetables, finding peace in the simple act of nurturing something. Alexander found himself happier than he had been in years. Coming home each evening to the sound of Maya's laughter, to the sight of Rachel smiling in the garden, filled a void he had not realized was still there. He had built a successful career, amassed wealth and influence, but none of it had brought him the contentment he felt now. But even as they built their new life together, there were still unresolved questions. One evening, after Maya had gone to bed, Rachel sat with Alexander in the study and brought up something that had been weighing on her mind. "I need to know," she said quietly. "Did your mother leave anything behind? Any explanation for why she did what she did?" Alexander hesitated, then stood and walked to the desk. He pulled out the box he had found at his mother's estate and set it in front of Rachel. "I found this at her house," he said. "There are letters inside. Some of them are from her, detailing what she did." Rachel opened the box with trembling hands and began to read. Alexander watched her face as she worked through the letters, seeing the pain and anger flicker across her features. When she finished, she sat back, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "She really hated me," Rachel said softly. "She was wrong," Alexander said firmly. "She had no right to do what she did. She took years from us, from Maya. She robbed us of the chance to be a family." Rachel nodded, but Alexander could see the hurt still lingering. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if she had not interfered? Every day, Alexander admitted, but I try not to dwell on it. We cannot change the past. All we can do is make the most of the time we have now. Rachel looked at him, her expression softening. You are right. We have been given a second chance. Not everyone gets that. They sat together in silence, the weight of the past slowly lifting. Outside, the night was quiet, and the house was still. For the first time in a long time, they both felt at peace. As Maya grew more comfortable in her new life, she began to open up more about her experiences. She told Alexander about the days she had spent walking through the city, selling sweets to anyone who would buy them. She told him about the people in the settlement, the neighbors who had looked out for her and Rachel when things were at their worst. She told him about the times she had gone to bed hungry and the nights she had stayed awake listening to her mother cough, terrified that she would stop breathing. Each story broke Alexander's heart a little more, but he listened without interrupting, knowing that Maya needed to share these things, needed him to understand what her life had been like. I used to dream about having a father, Maya said one day as they sat together in the garden. I would imagine what it would be like to have someone to protect us, to make sure we were safe, and now you are here. Alexander felt his throat tighten. I wish I had been there sooner. I wish I had known. It is okay, Maya said, and she reached out to take his hand. You are here now. That is what matters. Her forgiveness, so freely given, humbled him. He squeezed her hand gently and vowed once again that he would never let her down. Meanwhile, Alexander began to take steps to formalize his role in Maya's life. He consulted with lawyers about custody and adoption, wanting to make sure that everything was legal and official. Rachel supported the decision, though it was not without its own complications. She had been Maya's sole guardian for so long, and sharing that responsibility required trust and adjustment. But as the paperwork was processed and the legalities sorted out, it became clear that they were all on the same page. They wanted to be a family, in every sense of the word. One afternoon, Alexander took Maya to a notary's office where the final documents were signed. Maya did not fully understand all the legal jargon, but she understood that this meant Alexander was officially her father. When the notary handed her a copy of the papers, she held them carefully, as if they were something precious. "Does this mean I can call you Dad?" she asked. "You can call me whatever you like," Alexander said with a smile, "but I would be honored if you called me Dad." Maya grinned. "Okay, Dad." The word felt strange and wonderful on her tongue, and Alexander felt a surge of emotion that he struggled to contain. He pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly, and for a moment he allowed himself to simply be grateful. Back at the mansion, Rachel was waiting for them. When she saw the papers, she smiled and hugged Maya, then turned to Alexander. "Thank you," she said, "for giving her the life she deserves." "She is my daughter," Alexander said simply. "It is what any father would do." But they both knew it was more than that. It was a chance to right a wrong, to heal a wound that had been festering for years, and they were taking that chance with both hands. As the months continued to pass, the bond between the three of them grew stronger. They celebrated Maya's 10th birthday with a small party in the garden, the first real birthday celebration she had ever had. Alexander and Rachel worked together to decorate, hanging streamers and balloons, and they baked a cake that turned out lopsided but delicious. Maya's face lit up when she saw the decorations, and she ran through the garden with pure joy. They sang Happy Birthday, and she blew out the candles with a wish she kept secret. Later, when Alexander asked what she had wished for, she smiled and said, "I wished that we could always be together like this." "That is a wish I can make come true," Alexander said, and he meant it. They also began to establish new traditions. Sunday mornings were for breakfast together, with Alexander cooking pancakes while Rachel made fresh juice and Maya set the table. Friday evenings were for movie nights, where they would curl up on the couch with blankets and popcorn and watch whatever film Maya wanted. These simple routines, so ordinary and yet so meaningful, became the foundation of their family life. They were building something new, something that had been denied to them for so long, but even as they moved forward, the shadow of the past occasionally crept in. One night, Maya woke from a nightmare, crying out for her mother. Rachel rushed to her side, holding her and soothing her, and Alexander stood in the doorway, feeling helpless. "I dreamed we were back in the old house," Maya said between sobs, "and you were sick again, Mama, and I could not help you." "It was just a dream," Rachel murmured, stroking her hair. "We are safe now. We are together, and we are safe." But the nightmare was a reminder that healing was not instantaneous. The trauma of those years would take time to fade, and there would be setbacks along the way. Alexander joined them, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You do not have to be afraid anymore, Maya," he said gently. "I am here, and I will always protect you. Both of you." Maya looked at him, her eyes still wet with tears, and nodded. Slowly, her breathing steadied, and she fell back asleep, this time peacefully. Rachel and Alexander stayed with her for a while, neither of them speaking, just watching over her. Finally, Rachel whispered, "She has been through so much." "She is strong," Alexander said, "stronger than she should have to be. But she will not have to be that strong anymore. She can just be a child now." Rachel leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat together in the quiet room, united in their determination to give Maya the childhood she deserved. As the seasons changed, so did their lives. Alexander enrolled Maya in extracurricular activities, things she had never had the chance to try before. She took art classes and fell in love with painting. She joined a soccer team and discovered a competitive streak she had not known she had. She made friends, real friends, who invited her to birthday parties and sleepovers, and slowly she began to experience the normalcy that had been absent from her early years. Rachel, for her part, found new purpose. She volunteered at a local shelter, helping other women who were struggling, using her own experiences to offer guidance and support. It was fulfilling work, and it helped her process the trauma of her past. And Alexander, who had spent so many years focused on work and success, learned to prioritize what truly mattered. He cut back on his business commitments, delegating more to his team so that he could spend more time at home. He did not want to miss any more of Maya's milestones, any more of the small moments that made up a life. One evening, as they all sat together in the garden, watching the sunset, Maya turned to Alexander and asked, "Are you and Mama going to get married?" The question caught both adults off guard. Rachel looked at Alexander, her expression curious, and Alexander felt his heart skip a beat. "Would you like that?" he asked Maya. Maya nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, I think it would be nice. Then we would be a real family." "We are already a real family," Rachel said gently. "Marriage does not change that." "But it would be official," Maya insisted. "Like when Dad officially became my dad." Alexander smiled at her logic. He turned to Rachel, his expression serious. "She has a point." Rachel laughed softly. "Are you proposing?" "Maybe," Alexander said, his eyes twinkling. "Would you say yes?" Rachel looked at him for a long moment, and then she nodded. "Yes, I think I would." Maya let out a delighted squeal and threw her arms around both of them. "This is the best day ever." Alexander and Rachel laughed, and for a moment the three of them simply held each other, a tangle of arms and joy and hope. The wedding was small and intimate, held in the garden where so much of their story had unfolded. Maya served as the flower girl, scattering petals along the aisle with a seriousness that made the adults smile. A few close friends attended, people who had supported them through the transition, and the ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When Alexander and Rachel exchanged vows, they did so with tears in their eyes, acknowledging the journey that had brought them to this moment. They spoke of loss and hardship, but also of resilience and love. They spoke of the years they had been apart and the future they were building together. "I promise to never let you go again," Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise to love you and protect you and cherish you for the rest of my life." "I promise to trust you," Rachel said. "I promise to let go of the fear that kept me away for so long. I promise to build a life with you, whatever that looks like." They exchanged rings, simple gold bands that symbolized their commitment. And when they kissed, Maya cheered from her spot in the front row. The reception was held on the lawn, with string lights hung overhead and a small band playing soft music. They danced and laughed and celebrated, and for the first time in a long time, the past felt like it was truly behind them. As the evening wore on and the guests began to leave, Alexander found himself standing alone with Maya, watching Rachel chat with one of their friends. "Are you happy?" he asked his daughter. Maya looked up at him and smiled. "Yes, Dad, I am really happy." "Good," Alexander said. "That is all I want." They stood together in comfortable silence, and Alexander felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had been given a second chance, a chance to be the father he should have been from the beginning, and he was determined not to waste it. As the night drew to a close, the three of them walked back into the house together, hand in hand. The mansion, once so empty and cold, was now filled with warmth and life. It was a home in every sense of the word, a place where love had triumphed over lies, where truth had set them free. And as they closed the door behind them, stepping into the soft glow of the interior lights, they knew that they were exactly where they were meant to be, together. The months continued to unfold, with a rhythm that felt both new and comforting. Maya thrived in school, her natural intelligence and curiosity shining through as she caught up on years of missed education. Her teachers marveled at her progress, and Alexander made sure to attend every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every small event that marked her growing confidence. Rachel, now fully recovered, began to reclaim parts of herself that had been buried under years of survival mode. She started painting again, a hobby she had abandoned long ago, and her canvases began to fill the house with color. Alexander loved watching her work, seeing the way her face relaxed and her eyes sparkled when she was lost in the creative process. But even as they built this new life, there were still echoes of the past that needed to be addressed. One day, Maya came home from school with a family tree assignment. She sat at the kitchen table staring at the blank paper, her pencil hovering uncertainly. "What is wrong?" Rachel asked, noticing her daughter's hesitation. "I do not know what to write," Maya admitted. "The teacher said we have to include our grandparents, but I do not know anything about them." Rachel and Alexander exchanged a glance. They had known this conversation would come eventually, but that did not make it any easier. "Let me help you," Alexander said, pulling up a chair beside Maya. He took a deep breath and began. "Your grandmother on my side, her name was Victoria Bennett. She was a strong woman, very smart and very determined, but she also made some mistakes, big ones that hurt a lot of people." Maya listened quietly, her eyes wide. "Is she the one who made Mama go away?" "Yes," Alexander said honestly. "She is. Where is she now?" "She passed away a few years ago," Alexander said, "before I ever knew you existed." Maya was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then she asked, "What about my other grandparents?" "Mama's parents?" Rachel's face tightened. "My parents died when I was very young," she said softly. "I was raised by my grandmother, and she passed away before you were born." Maya nodded slowly, taking it all in. Then she picked up her pencil and began to fill in the family tree, writing names and dates with careful precision. When she finished, she held it up for them to see. "It is not very big," she said, a hint of sadness in her voice. "That is okay," Rachel said, reaching out to squeeze her hand. "Family is not about how many people you have. It is about the people who love you and take care of you, and you have us. And you have a lot of people who care about you now," Alexander added. "Our staff, your teachers, your friends. Family comes in many forms." Maya smiled, reassured, and carefully tucked the assignment into her backpack. Later that night, after Maya had gone to bed, Rachel and Alexander sat together in the study, a fire crackling in the fireplace. Rachel was curled up on the couch with a book, and Alexander was reviewing some documents for work, though his mind kept drifting. "Do you ever think about what we would tell Maya if she asked more about Victoria?" Rachel asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Alexander set down his papers and sighed. "I think about it all the time. I do not want to lie to her, but I also do not want to burden her with the full weight of what my mother did. She deserves the truth," Rachel said. "Maybe not all at once, but eventually she will need to know. Otherwise, it will just be another secret hanging over us." "You are right," Alexander agreed. "When she is older, when she can understand it better, we will tell her everything. But for now, I think it is enough for her to know that Victoria made mistakes." Rachel nodded, and they returned to their quiet evening, each lost in their own thoughts. As winter approached, the Bennett household prepared for the holidays. It would be their first Christmas together as a family, and Alexander was determined to make it special. He enlisted Maya's help in decorating the house, and they spent an entire weekend stringing lights and hanging ornaments, turning the mansion into a festive wonderland. Maya had never experienced a Christmas like this. In the past, the holiday had been just another day, marked only by the hope that someone might feel generous enough to buy more sweets. Now she was surrounded by warmth and joy, and it felt almost surreal. On Christmas morning, Maya woke early and ran downstairs to find a tree laden with presents. Her eyes went wide, and she looked at Alexander and Rachel with disbelief. "Are these all for me?" "Not all of them," Alexander said with a smile, "but many of them are." They spent the morning opening gifts, laughing and exclaiming over each surprise. Maya received books and art supplies, a new bike, and a beautiful dress that made her feel like a princess. But the gift that meant the most to her was a simple photo album that Alexander had put together, filled with pictures of the three of them from the past few months. "So we never forget," he said as she flipped through the pages. Maya hugged the album to her chest, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Dad." After the presents were opened, they cooked breakfast together, a chaotic affair that involved burnt toast and laughter. They spent the afternoon playing games and watching movies, and as the day drew to a close, they sat together in the living room, the lights from the tree casting a soft glow over them. "This has been the best day of my life," Maya said, her voice content. "Mine too," Rachel agreed, and Alexander nodded in agreement. As the new year began, the family continued to grow and evolve. Maya started to talk more about her dreams for the future. She wanted to be an artist, she declared one day, painting pictures that made people feel happy. Alexander and Rachel encouraged her, enrolling her in advanced art classes and making sure she had every resource she needed to pursue her passion. Rachel, inspired by her daughter's creativity, decided to do something she had always wanted to do, but never had the courage for. She enrolled in community college courses, working toward a degree in social work. She wanted to help others who had been in her position, to be a voice for those who felt voiceless. Alexander supported her completely, proud of her determination. He adjusted his own schedule to make sure he could help with Maya while Rachel attended classes, and he found that he enjoyed the routine of school pickups and homework help. One evening, As they sat down to dinner, Maya looked at her parents and said, "I am glad we are a family now." "So are we," Rachel said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Me too," Alexander added, his voice full of emotion. They ate together, talking about their days and making plans for the weekend. It was a simple moment, but it was everything. As the years passed, the story of how they came together became a cherished part of their family lore. Maya would sometimes tell her friends about the day she knocked on a stranger's door and discovered a photograph that changed everything. She spoke of it with a mix of pride and wonder, grateful for the courage she had shown as a child. Alexander never stopped being amazed by the resilience of his wife and daughter. He watched Maya grow into a confident, talented young woman, and he saw Rachel flourish in ways he had never imagined. The pain of the past was still there, a part of their story, but it no longer defined them. One summer afternoon, when Maya was 14, the three of them returned to the garden where it had all begun. They stood in front of the same spot where the old photograph had been taken, and Alexander pulled out his phone. "Let us take a new picture," he suggested. They posed together, Maya in the middle with her arms around her parents. Alexander set the timer and ran to join them, and they all smiled as the camera clicked. Later, when Alexander had the photo printed and framed, he hung it in the hallway right beside the old photograph. The contrast was striking. In the old picture, Rachel was young and uncertain, standing beside a man she loved, but would soon lose. In the new picture, she was older, wiser, and surrounded by the family she had fought so hard to protect. "Perfect," Alexander said, stepping back to admire the two images side by side. Rachel and Maya joined him, and they stood together, looking at the visual representation of their journey. "We made it," Rachel said softly. "Yes," Alexander agreed, "we did." And as they walked away, hand in hand, they carried with them the knowledge that love, no matter how tested, could endure. That truth, no matter how painful, was always worth pursuing, and that family, in whatever form it took, was the greatest gift of all.